Move it. You're clogging up my line. You and that trash bag you call shoes." Marcus Webb didn't look up. He tied his left sneaker first, then the right, using his thumb to smooth down the silver duct tape along the cracked toe box. That tape had been there since January. It was now the first week of October, and it was peeling under the blazing Crestfield High track field sun. Coach Dennis Farrow didn't wait for him to stand. He marched down the line of student athletes. Time trials today, 400-meter dash. Dead last gets latrine duty for a week. Webb, go ahead and drag your garbage kicks to the line. On your marks. The boys on the track team snickered. Marcus walked silently to the starting line. He lived at the end of Sycamore Creek Road, walking those 0.6 of a mile every morning with a broken zipper backpack held shut by a bungee cord. He never complained about being poor, and he never talked back to the coach. He just silently dropped into a low crouch, eyes locked onto the finish line ahead. 3, 2, 1, tweet! The whistle blew, and a dark blur tore through the air. Less than a minute later, the laughter on the field died instantly. Coach Farrow stared open-mouthed at the stopwatch in his hand, then whipped his head toward the finish line, where Marcus Webb was already standing. The silver duct tape on his toe box had been ripped open by the wind, exposing raw, bloody toes from the friction against the asphalt track. Yet, the 17-year-old's face remained gold, his breathing perfectly steady. 45, 2 seconds. The coach muttered, his voice cracking. His hands shook violently against the stopwatch. That wasn't a high school time. That was a near-national track and field record. His name was Arthur Gaines. He was 63 years old, with a silver beard he kept trimmed close, and a pair of New Balance shoes that had walked every kind of track surface on the continent. He had arrived in Harlan County that afternoon, not to see Marcus Webb, specifically, but because his niece ran on the girls' team, and he had driven down from Lexington to pick her up. He had been early, and so he had stood at the chain-link fence with a paper cup of gas station coffee and watched the boys run their drills. He watched Farrow move through the line, pointing, correcting, dismissing. He watched Marcus Webb crouch at the starting mark, set his weight, and explode out of the stance, with a drive phase that Gaines had not seen. Not on a high school grass field, not anywhere below the collegiate level. In 31 years of working in track development, he set his coffee on the roof of his car. He watched the boy run. Then he looked at his watch. He looked at it again. He was quiet for a very long time. In the Sunbright Diner on Route 19, Diane Webb was on her feet at the counter. The breakfast rush had folded into the lunch crowd, and the lunch crowd had barely thinned when the dinner regulars began arriving. And Diane worked the floor like someone who had learned long ago that momentum was the only protection she had against exhaustion. Her left knee had been swollen since August. She had not told Marcus. She had also not told him about the thing the doctor at the county clinic had found in her left lung on the chest x-ray from September. The thing he had described to her in a careful, measured voice while she sat on the crinkly paper of the exam table, holding her coat in her lap like. It was something precious. She had driven home. She had started her dinner shift at 5. She had not cried until the parking lot at 11:15, in her car, with the windows up. That was 6 weeks ago. She had told no one. Marcus came home at 6:30 that evening, and his mother was at the stove with her back to him, and the kitchen smelled like chicken soup made from the kind of stock that comes in a box, because the real kind required a whole chicken, and they were 3 days from payday. "You're late, baby." Practice ran long. She didn't turn around. She stirred the pot. They ate at the small table with the wobbly leg that Marcus had shimmed with a folded piece of cardboard 2 years ago. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, 1 paper towel each, because she had not gotten to the store, and the roll on the counter was down to its last few sheets. "Mom," Nothing. He went quiet. She watched him across the table. He was looking at the bowl, not at her. He had been looking at things slightly to the side of them for about 3 weeks now, the way people do when they are carrying something, say, they cannot put down. You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you? He looked up. Yeah, she nodded once and went back to eating. That night, after she heard his bedside lamp click off, Diane Webb went into the bathroom at the end of the hall and closed the door behind her without turning on the light. She ran the water cold. She gripped both sides of the sink. The thing in her chest that the doctor had spoken about in measured words was not measured anymore at 3 in the morning. It announced itself in ways she had learned to muffle with her hand over her mouth. She straightened up, dried her face, went to bed. 3 exits down the highway. In the superintendent's office of the Harlan County School District, a man named Clifton Marsh was having a phone conversation that had nothing to do with education. Clifton Marsh was the father of Derek Marsh, who ran the 100-meter dash at Crestfield High School with considerable effort and middling results, and who had been named to the varsity roster every year since he was a freshman by Coach Dennis Farrow, whose youth program Clifton Marsh had personally funded to the tune of $26,000 over 3 years. This was not a coincidence. Nobody said it was a coincidence out loud. "Dennis?" Clifton said. "I heard the Gaines boy." He caught himself. "I heard that man from Lexington was at your field today." "I'm aware. And I handled it." "Dennis, Arthur Gaines doesn't come to a grass field in Harlan County for scenery." "I told you. I handled it." "What does handled mean, exactly?" "It means the kid's not on anyone's radar who matters." Farrow paused. "He transferred in sophomore year. No club record, no USATF registration. I checked. He doesn't exist on paper." A silence on the line. "Good. Keep it that way." 2 days later, Arthur Gaines knocked on the glass door of the Sunbright Diner at 7:15 in the morning, before the breakfast rush, and Diane Webb looked up from the coffee station and saw a man she did not recognize in a gray windbreaker and sensible shoes, and the specific posture of someone who has decided to say a difficult thing and intends to say it anyway. "We're not open until 7:30, she said through the glass. "I'm not here to eat." "Ma'am." She let him in because something in his voice was the opposite of what she usually heard from men who came to see her. She had heard flattery, and she had heard transactions dressed up as flattery, and she had heard people who wanted something from her and introduced themselves last. This man introduced himself first. "My name is Arthur Gaines. I work with the United States Track and Field Development Program. I've been doing this for 30 years. I need to talk to you about your son." She did not move from behind the counter. "How many people have stood in this diner and told me something about my son, Mr. Gaines?" He did not fill the silence. She counted 3 coaches, 2 scouts. One man who said he represented a university fund and needed her checking account number, which she had not given him because she had not been born yesterday. "I'm not here to make you a promise, ma'am. I'm here to tell you what I saw and to ask you one question." She poured herself a coffee. She did not offer him one. She looked at him across the counter. "What question?" "If Marcus runs his worst race of his life tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, will you still respect what I'm about to say?" She considered him for a long time. "No one has ever asked me that." "No, ma'am. They usually don't." She set her coffee down. "Tell me what you saw." He told her. He told her the time he had clocked on a grass field with a hand timer that had been calibrated that morning. He told her what that time meant, and he told her what it would mean if it held on a real track surface. He told her 4 names, 4 athletes he had worked with over his career, and where they had gone, and what they had won. And then he said the part that nobody had ever said to her before. "I won't tell you, it's certain. I won't tell you. It's easy. I will tell you that in 30 years I have walked away from two kids I should not have walked away from, because nobody was there to keep me from taking the easy road. I'm not walking away from this one." Diane pressed her palms flat on the counter. "That morning in October. What happened before you saw him run?" A pause. He told her about Pharaoh at the line. He told her about the words. He told her about the shoes. Her face did not change. She had the face of a woman who had already received worse news than this and survived it. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small notepad she used for orders. She wrote her own number on the top sheet and tore it off and handed it to him across the counter. "I'll talk to Marcus tonight. If he wants to call you, I'll give him your number." "That's all I'm asking, ma'am." He left. She watched his car pull out of the lot. Then she tied her apron tighter and began setting up for the breakfast rush. That evening, Marcus came home, and Diane was sitting at the kitchen table, which she almost never did, because sitting meant not doing, and not doing meant thinking. She had the notepad in front of her. "Sit down," he sat. "A man came to see me this morning." She slid the notepad across. He looked at it. He looked at the name written underneath the number. He set it down. "Mom, don't. I'm not chasing something that's going to break your heart. There've been men before." "I know there have." She folded her hands on the table. "This one told me the truth when I asked him a hard question. He could have told me what I wanted to hear. He didn't." "You know how many people have done that in the last year?" He did not answer. "Zero, baby. Zero." Marcus looked at the number on the notepad for a long time. "I want to run, Mom." "I know you do. I want to run for real. Not on that grass field with him standing there telling me where I stink." "Then call that man." He called Arthur Gaines the next morning, from the payphone outside the Sunbright Diner, because their cell service had been suspended since August, and neither of them had acknowledged this fact out loud since the day it happened. "Marcus, I was hoping you'd call. Where do we start? There's an 8-lane asphalt track behind the old Fairgrounds Recreation Center on Caldwell Avenue. It's public, and it's empty on weekday mornings. Can you be there at 5:30 tomorrow?" "Yes, sir." "Bring the shoes." "Sir, they're the only pair I have." "I know, bring them. We're not replacing them yet." Marcus didn't ask what yet meant. He hung up the receiver and looked out at the diner window where his mother was visible through the glass, refilling a table of 4. She didn't see him watching. He pushed the door of the diner open and went inside and picked up a bus tub without being asked and started clearing tables. She noticed. She didn't say anything. That was its own kind of communication. The Fairgrounds Recreation Center track on Caldwell Avenue had 4 working lane markers, a cracked surface in Lane 7 that nobody had repaired since 2019, and not a single person on it at 5:30 in the morning except Arthur Gaines, who had arrived at 5:10 with 2 travel mugs and a clipboard he never once looked at during their first session. He spent the first 40 minutes on Marcus's start. "Show me how you come out of the line." Marcus crouched, set his hands, launched, "Stop, come back." He stopped, came back. "You're leaving early with your head. It's costing you the first 10 meters before your legs even know the race has started. Watch your hands." He corrected him 6 times that first morning. He did not raise his voice. He did not use the word good once. He said again and correct the left hand, and again. On the 34th attempt, Marcus came out of the crouch with his head down and his hips driving through, and his first 8 steps were so clean that Arthur Gaines said nothing for 3 full seconds after Marcus stopped running. Then he said, "Marcus, sir, you have been apologizing for being fast your entire life. Every race you've ever run, you have been running with one hand behind your back because somebody told you the track wasn't yours. We are going to fix that. It will take longer than fixing your start, but we will fix it." They worked for 6 weeks in the dark, before sunrise, And the news traveled the way news travels in small counties where people pay attention to the parking lots of unused rec facilities. A junior varsity official from a rival school told a referee. The referee told the Harlan County athletic director. The athletic director walked down the hallway of Crestfield High School on a Tuesday afternoon and sat down across from Coach Dennis Farrow. Dennis. Arthur Gaines has been training Marcus Webb privately on Caldwell Avenue. Farrow looked up from his desk. The bottom drawer, the one he kept locked, had not been opened since the night of the race on the grass field, the night he had sat in his truck in his own driveway for 40 minutes with the engine running. So Arthur Gaines does not drive from Lexington to run a private session at a public track for a kid who doesn't matter. Dennis, if that boy runs at a regional open under independent entry and places, and it comes out that he ran for us and we let him walk, what does that look like? Farrow said nothing. The athletic director slid a piece of paper across the desk. Marcus had submitted it through the school counselor. 5 items. Handwritten. Farrow read it. 1. Public acknowledgement before the full team that what was said was wrong. 2. Arthur Gaines to have access to team facilities and scheduling. 3. A merit-based scholarship fund for athletes, regardless of family income, established this academic year. 4. All varsity selection decisions posted publicly with documented criteria. 5. A guarantee, in writing, that what happened to me will not happen to another student on this team. Farrow read it twice. Then he turned it face down. He's 17 years old. He has Arthur Gaines standing behind him, the athletic director said. And he's right. Farrow reached for his phone before the athletic director had left the hallway. Clifton. We have a problem. The problem, as Clifton Marsh understood it, was that his son Derek's position on the varsity 100 roster was specifically protected by item 4 of the list, which if implemented would immediately reveal that Derek Marsh, who ran a time that would place him mid-pack at any decently competitive meet, held a roster spot that had been held open for him by design. This was the thing Clifton Marsh had paid $26,000 to protect. This was the thing he was not going to allow a kid from a double-wide on Sycamore Creek Road to dismantle. Tell him no, Clifton said. Tell him his conditions are not accepted. And Gaines? Gaines has no standing here. This is a high school. This is our county. Tell him no. If we tell him no, Clifton. Tell him no, Dennis. He's a kid with a sick mother. You say no, and this goes away. Farrow hung up. That was a Thursday. On Friday morning, a photographer from the Lexington Herald-Leader drove to Harlan County because Arthur Gaines had made a single phone call the previous evening to a reporter he had known for 11 years. The reporter was careful. The photographer was careful. The story they filed the following week described, with documentation, a high school sprinter from one of the lowest income zip codes in the state who had been publicly humiliated by his own coach, kept off the competitive record system, and whose coach had subsequently been observed on a phone call, heard through an open window by a school custodian who was willing to go on record, telling an associate that the boy was, quote, a kid with a sick mother who will go away. The custodian's name was Earl Tatum. He had worked at Crestfield for 14 years. He had watched Dennis Farrow walk that practice field for 11 of them. He had said nothing because he needed the job. He had said nothing because nobody had ever asked. Arthur Gaines had asked. Earl Tatum signed a statement. He signed it sitting at his kitchen table at 9:45 at night with a glass of sweet tea and the quiet certainty of a man who is tired of watching things happen and calling it survival. The story ran on a Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, it had been picked up by the Associated Press. By Friday morning, it was on the front page of the sports section of 4 Kentucky papers and 1 national outlet. By Sunday, a civil rights attorney in Louisville, named Patricia Ossie, had filed a formal complaint with the Kentucky Department of Education, alleging a pattern of discriminatory athletic selection at Crestfield High School. The complaint named Dennis Farrow. It named Clifton Marsh by relationship. And it included, attached as Exhibit C, a photocopy of a bank transfer record showing $26,000 moving from an account held by Marsh Consulting LLC to the Crestfield Booster Athletic Fund during the same 3-year window in which Derek Marsh held a varsity roster spot that his documented performance times did not justify. Patricia Osei had obtained that transfer record from a former booster treasurer who had kept a copy for 6 years because she had known, she said in her statement, that a day like this would come. Inside Clifton Marsh's office on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Harlan, his assistant knocked and entered and set a printed email on his desk. He read it. He read it again. His face did not register the words the way faces do when they are prepared. It registered them the way faces do when the wall comes down and everything that was behind the wall is suddenly in the room. He picked up his phone. He called Farrow. Farrow did not answer. He called his attorney. His attorney answered on the first ring and said, "Clifton, I've been expecting you to call." At Crestfield High School the following Monday, at 7:45 in the morning, the entire track team stood in the gymnasium in 2 lines. Marcus Webb stood alone near the back wall, near the exit, because he had not been given a jersey. He was wearing the same shoes. The tape on the right toe had peeled at one corner again. He pressed it back with his thumb while he waited. Coach Dennis Farrow walked to the center of the gym floor. He held a folded piece of paper. His hands were steady. His voice, when it came out, was not. "I said something to a member of this team that I am going to take back in front of this team. What I said about Marcus Webb was not coaching. It was not discipline. It was cruelty dressed up as authority, and I knew the difference when I said it, and I said it anyway. That is a thing I will have to live with. Marcus Webb is a member of this team. He should never have been treated otherwise. I am sorry." He folded the paper. He folded it again. The room was so quiet that someone in the back row could hear the fluorescent bulb above the exit sign buzzing. Marcus walked from the back wall to the front of the room. He took the jersey one of the assistant coaches held out without making eye contact with Farrow. He looked at Farrow for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the door. He did not say accepted. He did not say thank you. He had laid out 5 conditions. One had just been met in front of the same 31 witnesses it had been broken in front of. The account was not settled. The account had not even been opened yet. The Tri-County Regional Open was held at the Jefferson Sports Complex in Corbin, Kentucky, on a Saturday in late November, drawing 2,000 spectators, a cluster of college scouts, and the kind of young athletes who had been training on tartan tracks since middle school. Marcus Webb's entry on the program read simply, Webb M. Independent, a boy named Colton Briggs from Riverside Prep had won this race for 2 consecutive years. His spikes had been sponsored since he was 15. His coach had written 2 books. He sat on the locker room bench 3 seats from Marcus, lacing up with the practiced indifference of someone who has been the favorite so long that showing effort feels like weakness. He'd glanced once at the duct tape on Marcus's toe. He looked away. Arthur Gaines knelt in front of Marcus. "You have never raced on a tartan surface. It grips differently. You're going to feel like you're flying. Don't let it change what you do in the first 20 meters. Run the race I gave you. Don't run the race you think I want." "Yes, sir, Marcus. Colton Briggs has been on this surface 200 times. His dad spent 4 years getting him there. None of that matters when the gun goes off. The track doesn't know whose shoes cost more. Run your race." He ran his race. He came out of the blocks 400ths slow because the starting pedal angle was steeper than the asphalt at the fairgrounds track on Caldwell Avenue, and his right foot slipped the way it slips when a surface is new. By 20 meters, he had not panicked. By 40 meters, he was closing. By 60 meters, the crowd was on its feet without knowing exactly why. Only that something was happening on the outside lanes that was not supposed to be happening. He did not win. Colton Briggs crossed first. Marcus crossed a fifth of a second behind. Colton walked his deceleration and came back along the track and found Marcus with his hands on his knees and stood one step away. Colton said, "You slipped at the start." Marcus said, "Yeah." Colton looked at the tape on Marcus's shoe one more time. He looked at it the way people look at things that have shifted. Not from one state to another, but from one era to another. Then he walked toward the cool-down area. Arthur Gaines found Marcus 2 minutes later. That was the third fastest 100 ever run by an independent entry at this meet. I lost. You lost a fifth of a second on your first real track, in taped shoes, off a slip at the start. Marcus didn't answer. He picked up his bag. He walked toward the exit. Arthur let him go. In the parking lot outside the Jefferson Sports Complex, a reporter from the Corbin Tribune caught Arthur Gaines loading 2 folding chairs into his trunk. "Mr. Gaines, the kid in the taped shoes, who is he?" "His name is Marcus Webb. Where has he been training?" "With me, on a public track at 6 in the morning. "And before that?" Arthur Gaines put his hand on the trunk lid. "That's a question for his old coach." He closed the trunk. The story ran Thursday. A photograph of Marcus crossing the finish line in second place, shoes visible, expression closed and focused. The headline read, "Unknown independent entry nearly upsets two-time regional champ." Within 48 hours, it had been picked up by the Kentucky Sports Network and 2 national prep athletics outlets. Within 72 hours, someone had filmed Coach Farrow's apology in the gym on a phone and posted it without identifying themselves. And the comments section accumulated. Within the first 4 hours, 600 copies of the phrase "a kid with a sick mother who will go away." The phrase became a hashtag. The hashtag became a conversation. The conversation became something that could not be unhad. Inside Patricia Osie's office in Louisville, her phone rang 12 times that Friday. Federal investigators from the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights called to confirm receipt of the formal complaint and to notify her that a preliminary review had been opened. A second call came from a reporter at the Louisville Courier-Journal who had obtained, from an unspecified source, the booster fund transfer records. A third call came from a parent of a former Crestfield athlete, a boy who had run varsity for 2 years before being quietly cut from the roster. The same year Clifton Marsh's son enrolled, who wanted to know if it was too late to give a statement. It was not too late. Clifton Marsh's attorney called Clifton Marsh at 11 that Friday morning and used the words "significant exposure" and advised him not to speak publicly. Clifton Marsh did not listen. He called the local radio station at noon and gave an interview in which he described Marcus Webb, without using his name, as a publicity stunt orchestrated by people with an agenda against our school system and our community's investment in youth athletics. The interview was recorded. Patricia Osie played it in her opening brief. The state championship was held on a Saturday in December at the Lexington Athletic Center. 12,000 people in a facility designed for exactly that kind of crowd, broadcast on the regional sports network, and live-streamed for another 40,000 viewers. Marcus Webb ran in lane 5. Arthur Gaines sat in the coaches section, with both hands wrapped around the rail because it was the only thing he could think to hold on to. In the Sunbright Diner on Route 19, Diane Webb had traded her Saturday shift with a coworker for the first time in 4 years. She sat in a booth near the window because the owner had set up a small television behind the counter and angled it toward the dining room. She wore her good coat. She had not told anyone at the diner what was happening. She told them when the gun went off, and she stood up without meaning to. Marcus came out of the blocks clean. The drive phase was the cleanest of his life, because Arthur Gaines had spent 6 weeks rebuilding it from the ground up on an asphalt track at 5:30 in the morning in the dark. And the dark had a way of stripping everything down to what was real. At 40 meters, he was even with the field. At 60 meters, he had separated. At 80 meters, the 12,000 people had stopped being 12,000 separate people and had become one single held breath. He crossed the line and the board lit up. He stood at the finish with his hands at his sides for a moment. Then he reached down and pulled off his right shoe. He turned it over. He worked the folded note out of the tongue, where it had been tucked since the night his mother had found it in his equipment bag, and pressed it back into his hand without a word. He unfolded it. He read it. His mother had written it, a year ago, on a paper towel, in the handwriting she used when she was not performing for anyone. "Baby, run like you already know how it ends." He looked up toward the family section of the bleachers. Diane Webb was on her feet. She brought 2 fingers to her lips, kissed them, and pointed at her son the way people point when words have run out and all that's left is the gesture. He brought 2 fingers to his own lips and pointed back. The photograph ran the next morning in 11 papers. What followed was not quick, and it was not clean, and it was not the kind of justice that arrives in a single scene. It arrived the way real accountability arrives, in documents, in hearings, in depositions, in rooms with fluorescent lighting and no windows where people are asked to repeat the same thing into a recorder 3 times. The Department of Education's review found what Patricia Osei had said it would find. It found a documented pattern spanning 7 years at Crestfield High School, in which varsity roster decisions in boys' track and field had been influenced by financial relationships with booster donors rather than by documented athletic performance. It found 4 athletes over those 7 years who had been excluded from varsity competition or had their times deliberately underreported in official records. It found internal emails, including one from Coach Farrow to Clifton Marsh, that read, "Keep your son on the board, I'll manage the numbers," that made the arrangement legible to anyone who read them. Earl Tatum's statement corroborated what the emails said. The 4 excluded athletes, once contacted, each gave statements. They had each, separately, believed for years that they had simply not been good enough. The federal civil rights investigation resulted in the termination of Dennis Farrow's coaching contract and a 5-year bar from any publicly funded educational athletic program in the state. He did not go quietly. He hired an attorney who filed a grievance challenging the termination. The grievance was denied in March. He appealed in June. The appeal was denied in August, at which point the full documentation of the internal emails was entered into the public record, and his attorney stopped returning his calls. Clifton Marsh's financial entanglement with the Booster Fund resulted in a civil suit brought by Patricia Osei on behalf of 2 of the 4 displaced athletes. The suit settled in the spring for an amount that Osei described, in a statement, as meaningful to her clients and costly to the defendant. Marsh did not give interviews after the settlement. He did not run for re-election to the county school board, which he had been expected to do. He drove past the Crestfield track occasionally, people said, but he no longer stopped. His son Derek was offered a spot on the junior varsity team under a new coach. He accepted. He worked harder than he had in 4 years. He placed 3rd at a county invitational in May and stood at the finish line with both hands on his knees, breathing, looking at the board with an expression nobody around him had seen on his face before. His father was not in the stands. Kefro sat in his car in the driveway of his house. On the night the appeal was denied and did not go inside for a long time. He had been coaching for 19 years. He had won 7 county titles. He had, in those 19 years, told himself a specific story about what he was doing and why he was doing it. And the story had always been, in his own telling, about the sport. About standards, about what the sport demanded. He sat in his car, and for the first time allowed himself to hear the story as someone else would hear it. It was a long time before he went inside. 6 months after the state championship, the Marcus Webb Athletic Opportunity Fund awarded its first 8 grants to high school sprinters from low-income households in eastern Kentucky. Arthur Gaines served as the program director. Colton Briggs, who had spent the winter training alongside Marcus at the Fairgrounds Recreation Center, served as the fund's first public ambassador. He had asked, and the answer had been yes, and he had not forgotten the weight of that answer. Diane Webb was at the ceremony. She was thinner than she had been in December, and she walked with a cane now because the treatment had been hard on her balance. But she was there. She handed the first grant certificate in person to a 15-year-old girl from Pike County named Cassandra Holt, who had been running barefoot on a school field because she did not own spikes. Marcus crouched down and set a pair of spikes in front of Cassandra Holt before Diane handed her the certificate. The spikes had no tape on them. They were 2 sizes too large, and she would grow into them. The second pair he kept. They sat on the shelf above his bed. 1 strip of silver duct tape across the right toe, pressing down at the corner where it had always started to peel. He had not replaced the tape since December. He did not intend to. Some things you keep exactly as they were because they are the only honest record of where you started. And some things you carry all the way to the finish line, not because you have to, but because you promised someone you would. If you have ever been told, by a coach, a teacher, an employer, or a stranger with authority they did not earn, that you did not belong where you were standing, leave a comment. Just the word here. Because somewhere out there, someone who cannot afford better shoes is walking to a starting line. And the only thing standing between them and everything they are capable of is whether one person decides to see them. If this story reached you, not just entertained you, but reached you, share it with one person tonight. And if you are the coach, the teacher, the person with the power to see or look away, you already know what this story is asking of you.